Good evening and welcome to Digital Democracy on Tap. I'm Sarah Jane Crespo. We are 1 week away from Election Day. There's so much that is different about this year, and on our panel to discuss all of those different things, I have my colleague Deborah Shaar of KMUW, Chris Green of the Kansas Leadership Center, Kenya Cox of the NAACP of Kansas, and Jim McLean from the Kansas News Service. Please send us your questions on Facebook or email us at info@kmuw.org. We would love for you to be involved in our conversation tonight. So we're talking about Election Day. Let's start. We're going to go kind of through who, what, where, when, why, and how. And I want to start with who. Jim, can you kind of give us a rundown of who all is on the ballot? It's kind of a longer ballot than I think a lot of people realize. Other than, the big cheese in the White House, who that will be, who will people in Sedgwick County and the surrounding areas find on that ballot?
Well, of course, members of Congress run every 2 years. So your congressman down there, Congressman Estes, is up for re-election and is being challenged in the Wichita area. And of course, the big race aside from the presidential race on the Kansas ballot is the race for the United States Senate. It's an open seat this year because Pat Roberts, who had held onto that seat for quite a while, he'd been about 40 years in Congress between the House and the Senate, is retiring. And so you have Barbara Bollier, who's a Democratic state senator from the Kansas City area, running against Roger Marshall, who's the sitting congressman from Western Kansas in the 1st District, running for that open Senate seat. And it's a closer race than many expected at this point. Kansas is not in the category of states where the national prognosticators are not suggesting that Kansas necessarily is one of the states likely to flip from Republican to Democrat, but it's in that second tier of states that is closer than many people expected at this point. So that Senate race, the congressional races, of course, the entire state legislature is up for re-election this year. And there are a number of races in the Wichita area, as there are a number of races in the Johnson County area that hold a lot of importance in terms of the mix at the State House and whether or not Democratic Governor Laura Kelly is going to be able to get much done, because there's the prospect that the legislature could become much more conservative in this election cycle. And then, of course, you have the very hotly contested county commission race down there in Sedgwick County that I know Deborah is following.
That's right. It's been going on for the last year. You've seen a lot of activity on both sides for both of the races. There are 2 seats up for election on the county commission. District 2, which covers pretty much the southern part of Wichita and down to Clearwater and Hayesville. That has the Republican incumbent commissioner, Michael O'Donnell, and he has a challenger. His opponent is Democrat Sarah Lopez. The second seat that's up for election is District 3, and that covers kind of western Sedgwick County, a little bit of West Wichita, but then also all of the smaller cities out in the county. Republican incumbent Commissioner David Dennis has an opponent, Democrat Mike Ewan. So both of those races are contested. Commissioner Dennis and Commissioner O'Donnell both had primaries in August, and they won their primaries, obviously. And we'll find out what happens next week when all of the votes are counted.
We also have several district court judges that are on the ballot, and we don't want to forget our State Board of Education races. So
I forgot that down there in Wichita, you all elect judges. You don't just have retention elections, you actually elect them. Okay.
That was something that I was just about to ask, actually. Those little things, after all the people that you've heard of, when you get down into those things like judges and actually electing the sheriff, that sort of thing, one might imagine what the sheriff does. But how does voting for district judges affect our area that we live in? Do you want to talk a little bit about the race for those judges?
Well, I can speak a little bit. Here in Sedgwick County, right now, politically, when we look at the makeup of the bench, we have all Republicans and 1 Democrat, and that was very interesting. She is appointed by Governor Kelly, and so this is her first election. If diversity is very important to you, I like diversity, both women and men and different backgrounds, I think are very important. So, we think about, like you said, way up at the top, the president, but these judges have impact on our day-to-day life. They're making decisions for our families and our children, foster care, all of these things that are very, very vital and important to us. And so it is important to investigate and find out information about them.
Chris, I want to come to you here and talk about kind of a summary, if you can give, of kind of the concerns that are facing folks in our area, but Kansans in general right now. This recent issue of the Journal magazine, I think, kind of talks to a lot of different things that people are kind of feeling and things that they're concerned with. How would you summarize what folks are wrestling over right now in their lives?
Well, when we decided to do an issue focused on the elections, we actually ask our readers about the issues that they'd like to see candidates talking about. And they aren't always the issues that the candidates themselves want to talk about. Obviously, COVID-19, the pandemic, has been a foremost issue in people's mind, both in terms of like, how are elected officials going to respond to that and keep people safe and keep people healthy, and what sort of limits, and is there going to be local control, or does there need to be something like statewide mask ordinances? So that was on people's minds a lot, as was recovery from the pandemic and the fact that the economic hit we've taken has set up the potential to have some really difficult budget decisions being made in Topeka and at the local level as a result of declining revenues. Some other issues that came up on people's minds, the economy and stuff like access to broadband, especially in rural areas, which the pandemic has sort of exposed the huge divides that exist between Kansans that have access to really fast internet and Kansans that have barely anything above dial-up. Another issue is healthcare, which comes up a lot because of the pandemic election. And it's interesting, like, several states have expanded Medicaid through referendum votes, where in Missouri, where voters actually went out and voted in support of expanding Medicaid. But that's not something we can do in Kansas. We don't have initiative and referendum. So the only people who can expand Medicaid are the legislators. So people in making their voting decisions about in state House and state Senate races are also going to be, perhaps without even thinking about it, determining whether Medicaid will be expanded in the next 2 years in Kansas.
Sarah Jane, if I just might, I want to help connect dots for people here. I'm glad Chris brought that up. Oklahoma and Missouri both now have expanded Medicaid. Kansas is becoming more and more of an island in that respect, but that's an issue in the Senate race as well. Now, the Congress cannot pass Medicaid expansion in Kansas. It passed the Affordable Care Act, which permitted Medicaid expansion in the states. But what Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden is proposing would be the creation of a new public option program that would be similar to the Medicare program that people could buy into. And one of the features of his proposal is, in states that have not expanded Medicaid, people who would otherwise be eligible for Medicaid would be automatically eligible for this new program in states like Kansas that have not expanded Medicaid. So that's an issue in the Senate race. The Democrat Barbara Boyer, a state senator from the Kansas City area, is in favor of the Biden proposal. And of course, Congressman Marshall has been a leader in the Republican effort to repeal the Affordable Care Act. 85,000 Kansans roughly have their insurance through the Affordable Care Act marketplace. And there's been a great deal of talk about whether or not the repeal of the ACA then would put people with pre-existing conditions at risk for not being able to be insured.
So
healthcare is a big issue.
Yeah. And among the races that are occurring here, which ones do you think will determine those sorts of things the most for people in the future? Is it the Boyer-Marshall race, are there a variety of them that will kind of all come down in these areas?
I think it's all of the above. Yeah.
Go ahead, Chris.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's all of the above. I think the Boyer-Marshall race is going to have huge ramifications for what happens in healthcare. Races like that across the country will determine the future of healthcare. And I think that, there are signs that the State House is going to have a profound impact. There's a very big Senate race here in South Wichita between the incumbent Senator Mike Peterson and a former House Minority Leader, Jim Ward. And there are races scattered like that throughout Wichita and Topeka and Johnson County that will sort of perhaps shift the mix of the legislature either to the right or to the left, that will determine exactly how far we go in having government be involved with offering health insurance, trying to fill the coverage gaps that exist between the private sector, which covers the bulk of Kansans, and the public sector, which covers a much smaller percentage.
Did you want to add anything to that, Jim?
Well, just that, Chris is exactly right. People will remember going back to the last session, Governor Kelly and Senator Jim Denning, who was the majority leader of the Kansas Senate, he's a Republican from Overland Park, had come to some sort of a meeting of the minds and a deal on Medicaid expansion. But Senator Susan Wagle, from Wichita, who was the president of the Kansas Senate, didn't permit that proposal, that deal, that legislation to even come to a vote on the Senate floor. So Chris is exactly right. The complexion of the State House in terms of some of the moderate Republican senators who were elected in the wake of the Brownback tax experiment were defeated in the primary. They're mainly from rural areas. And so it looks like more conservative Republicans will win those seats. A big key will be what happens in the suburban and metropolitan areas of Johnson County and Wichita in terms of what the legislature looks like.
Mm-hmm. Kenya, will you share kind of what is of greatest interest or concern for you this week, a week out from Election Day? What are you most active in informing people about?
So right now, our focus is really get out the vote, getting people to really take advantage of the opportunity to vote early. With the drop boxes, we have 12 throughout Sedgwick County, 6 in the Wichita proper area. So that's and many people that I've been talking to, they, with all the negative news about the Postal Service, a lot of people. So Deborah, that goes to what you were speaking about earlier. A lot of people are just not taking the chance and mailing their ballot. They're taking advantage of those drop box opportunities. And then today, the one thing that was real different, we had the opportunity to go to the Entrust Arena for voting. That's different than what has been available to our area before. And now today we started with the early voting satellite sites. So we're really encouraging people to take advantage of that. We have a big weekend, no contact canvassing, get out the vote, rock the vote, family vote effort this weekend, where we're just really encouraging people, don't wait until till Tuesday, November the 3rd, get out and vote now and do it early, and encourage everybody that to participate.
And no, none of those drop-off boxes have been set on fire in Wichita.
No,
like the one
not
in
yet.
Yeah.
Deborah, will you give us an update on how voting is going in Sedgwick County so far?
So I had a chance to talk with Deputy Election Commissioner Melissa Schneiders today, and she's overseeing what Sedgwick County is doing in terms of the early voting. And she mentioned the drop boxes, which, we have, I think, 14 here around Sedgwick County, and they received federal money to be able to install these ballot drop boxes. Now, other states have had ballot drop boxes, but this is the first time I believe Kansas and maybe Sedgwick County has had them. So it is something new. And it allows voters to just walk up. Usually, I don't think some of them may be accessible through the car window, but a lot of them you have to walk up and drop in your mail ballot into them. Melissa Schneiders says that she has a team that goes out every day and collects the ballots that are deposited in those drop boxes. Thousands are coming back every day, thousands. She
Wow.
said that, the voters have really taken to using the ballot drop boxes. And even though the mail delivery, the postal service is of course steady with ballots coming back to the election office, but they've noticed that the ballot drop boxes are getting thousands every day as well, and probably has a little bit more volume right now than the US Postal Service in terms of getting the mail ballots back to the election office. So that's the good news. No fires as far as we know, but I know the county really was thoughtful and about where they placed these ballot drop boxes around the county. They chose public facilities, areas that were secure, areas that could be watched over, and be able to have a convenient place for voters to go. So you don't have to drive to Wichita to the election office. You could in Clearwater or Mays or other parts of the county drop off the ballots right near your house. And that was the whole idea. And I think it's working as far as she's saying, because we're a week away and they're still getting this high volume of people returning the mail ballots.
Did you, I'm trying to remember if you had the number on how many ballots they mailed and how many they've had received back yet?
Yeah, so overall, I mean, that's just the mail drop boxes that I was talking about. But overall, the election office sent out this year 95,000 mail ballots. So those are voters who requested to vote by mail. So 95,000 ballots went out. Right now, a week out of the election day, we have more than 55,000 have been returned.
Wow.
So a little bit more than half, I think she was saying. So that's a good thing. And that's about where the Kansas Secretary of State is at as well with their data. Of all the ballots that were sent out statewide, they're getting about 55% back already too. So that's the key thing. A lot of people request ballots, but you've got to actually fill them out, and return them and get them back into the office to be counted. In terms of the in-person voting, they've had more than 15,000 people who have voted at the open polling places around Sedgwick County. Of course, today, as Kenya mentioned, the 16 other sites opened up for early voting, but the Interest Bank Arena, sports arena, has been open, and the election office itself has been open since last week. So 15,000 people so far. And that's why I kind of laugh every time I hear someone say election day. It's really not an election day anymore. Really, it's an election season. It's you can vote over 2 weeks on this election. So, and a lot of people are voting before the actual election day. So we've got to change that language and referring to it as an election season instead of just one day.
It really is amazing to hear your reporting there, Deborah, because it sounds, you hear stories about really, really, really long lines in a lot of cities across the country, and there's a lot of discussion about voter suppression, et cetera. But it sounds like you all down there in the Sedgwick County area in Wichita really have your act together. And there are multiple options for people who want to vote early.
That's right. And I did ask her that question, if there's been any problems. And she said today, because the other locations open up for early voting, the satellite polling spots open, she said that the office did receive some calls because people were calling to say, oh, there's a little bit of a line here. Let me go somewhere else. Where is it not busy? And when she says line, she means that it's 10 minutes wait. We're not talking an hour like you've seen in other cities.
Hours.
And,
yeah.
Yes. And we're not, they're not seeing that at all. So if anything, they were trying to get people moved around to places that weren't quite as busy. But yes, so far, it seems to be that way from what she's saying. Now, you have to remember too, Jim, you probably know that Sedgwick County really spearheaded the effort to get open polling approved in the state. Open polling,
I remember that. Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So open polling is just like this early voting period where you can, as a registered voter, you can go to any polling location that's open and cast your ballot. That's what open polling is. Right. And the state approved it last year. They didn't have enough time to get it into effect for this election, but surely it'll be there for the next year.
Yeah, so Democratic legislators were prepared to sue Secretary of State Scott Schwab on that point, but he said, listen, hey, my job is to run elections and make sure that they run properly, and we just didn't have time to implement that system. I don't think, I suppose the accusation could be made that he was dragging his feet, but I don't think so. It's just a matter of getting that system implemented, and so I think we can look forward to seeing that in future elections.
Yeah, and certainly some smaller counties may not have the technology to be able to do open polling. So that was on a statewide level, being able to do it. That was the consideration of why it was taking a little bit longer. But certainly here in Sedgwick County, we've had the technology. They've pushed for this. We've actually been doing it successfully during the early voting period. And so it's just a matter of time before every election, you're able to go to any polling location to cast your ballot. And that makes it really convenient for voters. You know, you don't have to wait till that one day and go to that one place where you're designated. You can go anywhere.
But don't try to do that this year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because if
Yeah.
you do it this year, you'll be asked probably to cast a provisional ballot. And we're already having some small issues with people who requested mail-in ballots showing up at in-person sites. And when you do that, you cast a provisional ballot, which means your ballot doesn't count until it goes to the certification of the vote, and they can confirm that you didn't cast your mail-in ballot, and then your vote will count, but you won't see it in the totals on election night. And with all the discussion about election night and some of the concerns there, it seems like thinking about when your ballot will be counted is something you have to think about as a voter this year.
That's a really good
And that's
point.
something that they can do also. They can go on to the website to check to see if we're in the process their mail-in ballot is, which I think is really gives a lot of voters a sense of confidence, because you can check. I actually was with a senior citizen yesterday that was very concerned if her vote, and so we actually went on the we went to the Sedgwick County website, and then it took us to another site and put in her information so we could see her ballot hadn't been counted. So I called the Sedgwick County election office, and listen, they're answering phones. They have been so responsive. Commissioner Tabitha Lehman has really done a very good job of being very responsive to the needs of the voters in Sedgwick County. I want to make sure that I say that, because I think we were really we were giving her a hard time early on, and she's really done a good job. But so that they can check to see, back to the point, so that they can check to see if their mail-in ballot has been received and counted. So I think that's a really good thing for people to know, that they can check the status of their mail-in ballots.
Yeah. Right now, the county election office says that there is a little bit of a backlog, and it's taking about a week for it to show up. So not to panic. If you send in your ballot today, it may be about a week before you actually see that it's registered and logged into the county system. And that's just because of the high volume of people returning ballots. So that's the consequence of everybody voting at the same time, sending in their mail ballots. It's just taking them a little bit longer to process.
Do you all think, though, Deborah, you mentioned election season, these changes that are happening largely due to COVID-19 are is this going to be kind of the new way for forever now?
Seems logical. I mean, why haven't we used Intrust Bank Arena for voting? I mean, it's a huge place that, well, of course, right now it's not busy, but if it's not busy during this election time, I mean, why not? It seemed pretty seamless for the county to be able to provide the equipment and the staff to have 50 voting stations. The ballot drop boxes, again, I have a relative in Colorado, and she said they've had ballot drop boxes for 6 or 7 years, and they weren't sure why there was so much excitement around ballot drop boxes. And I said, oh, really? We're just getting them in Kansas. And so
Colorado has had virtually all voting by mail for several years.
Yes, exactly.
Several
so
states have.
Yeah, when we were talking about the election, it's quite a big difference for when I was telling, her what was happening here in Kansas compared to what they're doing in Colorado. You can see that, a lot of this other states have already been doing this for a while.
Think about this. We have this day, the first Tuesday in November, where people go to vote. But think about it. It's not a national holiday, so people have to work. And if you work in a service sector job, long hours, 12-hour shift or something like that, and you have to get kids ready to go to school or something like that, it is harder than some people might imagine to break free and vote if your only option is to vote on election day. A lot of countries have make election day a holiday, so nobody has to go to work. They can vote, and they have extended hours and the kinds of things that we've been talking about here in terms of early voting and drop boxes and so forth. I mean, in some ways, it's harder to vote in America than in a lot of other countries. And it does seem like this election, prompted by the COVID-19 pandemic, but this election, things are changing, and that voting into the future will be easier because of what we've had to do this year.
Mm.
And
That
most
seems
of those
true.
satellite stations, they're open until 7 p.m. So that, you can vote early and you can do it after work. So they're open until 7, and even
And on the
weekend.
weekend, yeah.
Oh, all
It's
right.
amazing too, the number of people who are voting early. I've been hearing reports in some states, they're already up to almost 60 to higher than 60% of the entire vote total from 2016 have already voted this year. So, I mean, it's clear that regardless of where you live in this country, people see this election as very important and are eager to go to the polls.
Mm.
Yeah, from the Kansas Secretary of State's office today, just to show you that in 2016, which of course was the last presidential election, they sent out 191,000 mail ballots.
Mhm.
This year, statewide, and this year the Secretary of State sent out more than 500,000. So that's how much it's increased with the mail ballots. So you can imagine, everything increases on top of that, the processing, the counting, the staff to do all of that too.
And
So
Chris, I don't know if you covered this in the journal, Chris and Kenya, what evidence do you see of actually increased registration in your area? Are more people registered to vote than there were 4 years ago, or do we know?
Well, I'm not 100% sure on those statistics. Deborah, do you have that? If we're up, I know that I've been hearing through the media that the registration is up, but I don't know in our area specifically how much of an increase. I know we have been working because there was a decrease in African American turnout in the 2016 election. There was actually a 7% drop from the 2012 election. So we're really pushing to get those first-time voters and low propensity voters out this time and really get them engaged in the process.
The uptick that I've heard about is with young people in like the 18 to 26 area, and there have been increase in registrations, I think in part stemming from a court ruling that allowed them to use a different form to register to vote. And so there's a website, Kansas Votes, where that I think is a relatively simple way, KS Votes, to just sort of register online. And you still have to show your ID to vote, but I think there's some different rules there that just makes the registration a little more seamless for younger people.
And by the numbers, back to the question too, I think we had over 300,000, maybe 320,000 registered voters. And in the 2016 election, I know it was quite a bit, tens of thousands less than that, probably in the 280 range. I did a story on it, but I don't remember the exact numbers, but I know they reported that it is up compared to the 2016 presidential election. Jim.
A lot of great information. And as far as logistics go, knowing that if you requested a mail-in ballot, that's what you're going to use unless you are okay with your vote being provisional. That's great information. And as far as logistics goes, Deborah, when do people need to get their mail-in ballots postmarked if they're going to use the Postal Service rather than the drop boxes? And are there any other dates that people should be aware of?
Today is actually the last day to request a mail ballot. So if you are still thinking to go that option, you need to get it in before midnight, I think is the deadline, the 27th.
Just online, they can request it?
Yeah, I believe so. The mail ballots have to be postmarked by November 3rd, which is the election day, and it has to be received in the office by that Friday, so 3 days after the fact.
And you would, of course, need a stamp to mail it, but you don't need to stamp it to put it into a drop box. Is that correct?
Correct. As far as I understand it, yes.
And again, it's worth noting here that a lot of other states that, Kansas is kind of in the middle of the boat in terms of allowing that grace period postmarked by election day, but 3 days to arrive. I mean, some states are stricter than that in terms of when the ballots have to come into the election offices and so forth. And so I think that, it's relatively easier to vote in Kansas in many ways than lots of other places.
Mm. I'm Sarah Jane Crespo, and this is Digital Democracy on Tap. We're talking about everything you might ever want to know between now and Election Day. On our panel this evening is my colleague Deborah Shaar of KMUW, Chris Green of Kansas Leadership Center, Kenya Cox of the NAACP, and Jim McLean of the Kansas News Service. We want you to join the conversation too. Please send us your questions on Facebook or email us at info@kmuw.org. Chris, what does it mean to be a voter at this moment in our history? What are your impressions?
I get the sense, and it's kind of early to tell, but this feels like an election that everybody who votes in it is going to remember. Like, I remember voting in the 2000 presidential election and all of the controversy that stemmed from the closeness of that outcome. And I don't know whether this presidential election will be close or not, or what the outcome will be, but it feels like it's going to have significant ramifications for years to come. I've only voted in maybe one U.S. Senate race that was considered competitive, and actually turned out to not be that competitive. So it just feels like your vote, there's a weight to voting, and there's a significance to voting that you can't say this year that your vote doesn't matter, because there's just so much writing and so much passion around this particular election. And it goes all the way, to the presidential race, all the way down to local races, like the one we have here for county commission involving incumbent Michael O'Donnell and Sarah Lopez. And it's hard to find something not to care about on the ballot.
Why does it matter to take some stand in local elections in particular? I guess can one of you guys help for listeners to understand what those local elections really do for them, as opposed to the big national stuff that you hear so much more about?
Well, I'll lead in with that, because we did a lot of protests and a lot of rallies. We saw that happening here in Wichita. And one of the things that we really talked about was the fact that your vote is the ultimate protest. That district attorney's person that makes those, that's an elected position. Those, the sheriff department, those people, the individuals that sit on the city council, they are the ones that select and hire the police chief. So you really have a really opportunity to affect change almost immediately in the way that individuals respond to your needs by participating in the election process.
The COVID-19 pandemic really showed everybody how important our city and county leaders are. They're the ones making all of the decisions that affected everybody's daily life, literally, if they could leave their house. So that's how important those roles are. And those people are making those decisions on behalf of the community. And we've never had a pandemic like this where people had to make hard decisions and make things that some people were upset with. And so that's a motivation for people to vote and to pay attention to who is making the decisions in their community.
And since voting straight ticket is no longer an option in Kansas, and people have to read through every single race, you can't just be a Democrat or a Republican when you walk into the ballot box or go and sit at your table ballot box. Do you all think this helps people to be more thoughtful or thorough, or will it hinder the number of responses that we get for certain races?
Are you talking about the fact that some local races are not partisan races?
No, about just how you can't just say I'm Republican or Democrat and be done with it. You have to kind of go all the way down and fill in every bubble if you wish to. Does that have an impact on the number of responses that ultimately come through for the local races?
Well, I think you certainly could still just go down the line if you so choose to.
Yeah.
But I think some of the advantages that we have with technology now is Google is our friend. And so you can really, if you're not sure and you're doing those mail-in ballots, Google, see what those individuals, what their platforms are, what they say they represent. Does that line up with my values? And so you do have that opportunity to do a little, I mean, just doesn't take very long to just do some research online. And that's one of the advantages that mail ballots allows you to take advantage of.
Take your time when you're going down through the ballot. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But when you're researching candidates, I mean, I've collected this pile of information. I want to put quotes around it. This pile of stuff about each candidate that directly contradicts each other. And what is the best way for people to really, I mean, even if they go to that candidate's own platform on their own website, I don't know, how do you help people to really feel like they have a firm grasp of what this candidate would do in office? Not, beyond misinformation.
Well, I think you've never had more of an opportunity to reach out directly to candidates if you have questions. Like most of them are on social media, responding to emails. Like I think you have power as a voter to really seek people out. Kansas has just some really interesting traditions of ticket splitting. I mean, when you think that, Kansas has elected a number of Democratic governors and not elected U.S. senators, I'm going to say since 1932, if that's wrong, please correct me. But those are like, not quite the same electorate, but very similar. And so it's just Kansans have some unpredictable preferences, and even if you look at like presidential races, there are 35, 40 districts that voted both for President Trump in 2016 and also for Governor Laura Kelly in 2018. So I think when Kansas have candidates who reach out and make a case and have a platform and try to do things to compete, like they take note of that.
I think we'd be remiss, though, if we didn't talk about how sophisticated candidates have gotten, and the people around them, the people who do the mailers and the advertising and so forth, how sophisticated they've gotten at manipulating public opinion and really not engaging in genuine conversations about their positions. And and I thought Chris was going to go off on this a little bit too. And that's the level of sophistication is to some degree coincided with the fact that local media, in a lot of, particularly throughout Kansas, small local newspapers are not nearly as strong or as capable as they used to be. Don't have the reporting staffs and so forth. I remember when I was growing up in Southeast Kansas in Parsons, the Parsons' son, Clyde Reed, who's the son of a former governor and a former U.S. senator, was the publisher of that paper. And you really had blanket coverage of local elections from the sheriff to the county commission to local legislators in those newspapers. And you had a source of, I will say, somewhat objective information about these candidates that you don't have now. And if you're totally dependent on their websites and their social media campaigns and so forth, you have to be wary of some of the claims that are, and you have to do really more of the research yourself. I mean, it's possible, certainly, but I think I think the fact that the local media outlets aren't as strong as they have been in the past do handicap voters to some degree.
I know we were a little
out there. And there's research out there that says that one of the reasons that we are getting more partisan is a lack of information about candidates.
Yeah, I know we worked really hard to provide several voter forms so that, with the virtual technology, you really had an opportunity to just ask your own specific questions. We utilized Facebook. And so voters really had an opportunity. We had senatorial candidates all the way down the ticket to the school board members. So when I think community organizations provide that opportunity. We've just got to make sure that people take advantage of it, because that's their chance to ask their own personal questions directly to the candidates.
Kenya, will you talk a little bit about voter suppression versus voter depression, and whether one or both or neither are issues, particularly in this election?
Well, it just depends on who's telling the story, because, I mean, really, maybe not so much here in Sedgwick County, but I'm the president for the Kansas NAACP, and I've got some reports in some of the other areas about some just outright overt voter suppression efforts. But we actually started off with the 2 phases of our campaign. We started out looking at voter depression, people who just really didn't believe, oh, my vote doesn't matter, it's not important, it's not going to make a difference. So we were focusing on registration, making sure that individuals had that opportunity to, to kind of get them encouraged. Now we've moved from that to actually the mobilization part, getting people out to vote, and then giving them reasons why they can vote and why they should vote, like many of the things that we've talked about here today. Chris, you started, you actually was leading into something that I thought that was very interesting in an opportunity that I had during a discussion about the fact that this president has nominated more justices to the appellate, Supreme, and district court than any other president. And so when you think about that, you think about the fact that beyond any 4 years that an individual will serve, this has the potential to impact our lives for 40 years, for 4 decades, because these positions are lifetime appointments. And so, when you stop and you think about that, wow, so my willingness to be inconvenience, and Deborah, you said it, we have a voting season now, so it's really little inconvenience, and really you could sit at home, fill out your ballot, mail it in, can really make a decision, will make an impact for the next 40 years, could have that potential to make that impact. And we had not one one African-American justice in that 199 justices that were appointed. So if those things are important to you, then you do need to be informed, you got to be engaged, and then you've got to get out and vote.
I'd like to hear more about the reports you've heard from around the state. That sounds like a news story.
Yeah.
Cool, we're making connections here tonight. Okay, so I have multiple email questions regarding this. I have these kind of pulled into one summary question. I'm supporting Dr. Joe Jorgensen for president, and am continuously disappointed that a candidate on the ballot in all 50 states does not get the media coverage she deserves. The American people deserve to hear about all of their alternatives, and the polls that are used to determine the numbers for a candidate to earn a spot on the debate stage rarely include third parties, making it impossible to earn a fair spot. What are your thoughts on this, and how can we ensure that the American people are aware of all of their alternatives? Sort of a patched together version.
Well, I will channel conversations I've had with virtually every political scientist that I've interviewed over the years. And America's system just is not set up for third parties. It's a 2-party system, and third parties rarely in this country have ever been competitive. And what they, generally speaking, have done is tilt the election one way or the other to one of the major party candidates. I mean, we saw that with the Nader candidacy in 2000. We certainly at Perot's candidacy, frankly, gave the election to Bill Clinton over George H.W. Bush at that time. So the bottom line is, I understand the desire for options, and I understand why some people don't gravitate to one of the 2 major party candidates, but we have a binary system. And that's just the way the American system works. We don't have a parliamentary system. We don't have all this coalition building and so forth. And so I understand that people get frustrated by the fact that the media tends to ignore to some degree some of the third-party candidates, but that's just simply a reflection of the reality of our system.
What is it fundamentally in our system that makes it that way? I know this is probably a big question. Why is this our system?
Well, we just have developed a two-party system, two strong political parties. I mean, there have been other parties, the Whig Party and others, for instance, that have gone out of existence. The Republican Party literally was born out of that party's demise. But we never had a time when 3 or 4 equally powerful parties existed on the American stage. It just isn't the American system.
Hmm.
And Jim, there were a lot of candidates in the Senate race on both Republican and Democratic side before it got down to these two.
Yeah, the Republican primary was particularly crowded, and there were about 4 candidates, again, who, unfortunately, who had the wherewithal, generally speaking, meaning money and name recognition, to make a legitimate run at the nomination. I've always been intrigued as a journalist. I've always wanted to interview candidates who are running for a major office like U.S. Senate, who don't realistically have a shot at winning the race. And I like to understand what motivates them. And I think it's fairly altruistic. I mean, they want to make a difference. They want a platform. They have something to say. They believe they have something to contribute. But again, the system itself, and the media is part of that system, but you have to acknowledge that, really isn't advantageous and isn't set up to accommodate those kinds of third-party runs.
One thing, though, that I think that it really offers us an advantage is that many times they interject things into the conversation that would not be talked about by the two major parties. And so that has been an advantage for us in that they bring to light many of the issues that are not being talked about. So I think that's an advantage to having at least giving them a platform and giving them an opportunity to hear their viewpoints. I always share the importance of that, getting educated about our candidates, because just because someone shares your political particular party doesn't mean that they share your values or what you want to see, the direction that you want to see your community or your state go.
Right, but that's particularly true in primaries, which are generally speaking free-for-alls. But again, you have sometimes you have a long list of potential candidates in a primary, but they're still fighting for a major party nomination to give them a shot at winning the general election. But you're right, and we saw that particularly, I think, in the Democratic presidential primaries this year, where, I think Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, they didn't win the nomination, but they certainly influenced the conversation and influenced the views and the proposals of the people who eventually did then get the nomination.
Deborah, I want to come back to you on the Sedgwick County Commission race with Michael O'Donnell, of course, running for re-election against Sarah Lopez, and the fact that several fellow commissioners have asked him to resign following his involvement in an attack ad in last year's mayoral campaign. Are there other updates on that you can share, and how might they affect the race? Is there more that you can go into on that?
Well, that story has been changing pretty much every day for the last week or so. Today, the news is that the Wichita City Council got involved and held a special meeting and voted to condemn James Clendenin, who is the Wichita City Council member who was accused in that, who was named in the defamation lawsuit, as well as Michael O'Donnell and Kansas Representative Michael Capps. So that happened, and my story today that we have out is kind of the reaction from the O'Donnell camp. His lawyer has told him not to respond to media requests for comment. Obviously, there's been a lot of attention on him and the other two since last Friday, when a secretly recorded conversation was made public. And in that conversation, there are 3 men talking and plotting about how to answer questions regarding that attack campaign video against then candidate Brandon Whipple. So since that audio recording came out, obviously everybody wants to hear from the 3. And Michael O'Donnell's attorney told him not to speak to the media, so he's not offering any comments, but his attorney did provide to me a court document that he filed in the case And it's basically answering to every allegation that is listed in Mayor Whipple's defamation lawsuit. So I went through it today. It's about 8 pages long, and it's line by line. And the bottom line, O'Donnell's attorney says that O'Donnell denies the allegations that he had a role in that campaign video ad. He did not write the script. He did not conspire to cover up the actions, and he had no involvement in it. He's also asking for a jury trial when this lawsuit gets to that stage. And I interviewed Michael O'Donnell back in July for the campaign, obviously for the District 2 race. And then again for this race that's coming up, that's on the ballot right now, the general election. And so when I interviewed him in July, we had talked about the campaign attack video because he was accused at that point. I don't think he was named in the lawsuit because they still had it listed as John Doe. But in October, Mayor Whipple's attorney amended the defamation lawsuit and named O'Donnell, Capps, and Clendenin. So at that point in July, he wasn't a named defendant. And I asked him specifically about the allegations, and he told me as well the same thing as what his attorney has said. So his comments have been pretty consistent over the last year that he had no involvement in it.
Do you have any sense about how this might affect the election?
Well, obviously it puts him in a very big spotlight right now. People are seeing all of the coverage about the lawsuit and about his involvement and the audio recording, which really sounds like him. I mean, I haven't confirmed it independently that it is those 3 individuals, so I hesitate to say that it's them because I don't have that independent confirmation. But it really does sound like him in the audio recording. And I know since that recording was made public, several elected leaders have come out and condemned the actions that were reported from the audio recording. And they've asked O'Donnell and Capps and Clendenin to resign immediately. And those officials I'm talking about are the 4 commissioners on the Sedgwick County Commission. So it's his colleagues who are saying that they are against what they're hearing about the actions related to the lawsuit.
Michael O'Donnell wanting to comment right now, Deborah. You ought to answer.
Yeah, you can take it.
And it was pretty interesting that even the 4th District congressman weighed in and asked for them to all resign. So, I mean, it's really getting very, very interesting.
And I will say on the campaign level, you asked about that. Several business groups, I think, have revoked their endorsements of Michael O'Donnell that previously had endorsed him and supported his campaign. And so that came out today. I received a couple of emails from groups with a statement saying that they're no longer endorsing him. So that alone definitely affects his campaign as well. He had a lot of support coming into this race. For the general election. As you know, in the primary, he received 64% of the vote over 2 other candidates, Republican candidates. And so he had a good showing in the primary, and he had a lot of support coming into the general elections. So now the question will be how the voters will react to the allegations, again, their allegations in this lawsuit of his involvement and how it influences how they vote in that race.
Beyond the campaign, one wonders how, if he should be reelected, how he would get along with his colleagues and his ability to govern, you know, given the fact that many of them have now come out and openly called for his resignation. And he'll have this defamation lawsuit hanging over his head should he continue to serve in that capacity. So, you know, that's got to be a question on voters' minds as well.
Yeah, and it comes back to the trust issue. And I think that's how the commissioners phrased it when they had heard the audio recording, and they assumed that it's him and he said those things, and they said they really can't speak of that they lost their trust in his ability to serve in public office. And O'Donnell's attorney will say too that this lawsuit was filed as a way to impact the Sedgwick County Commission race, and that the timing of it is intended to be right before the election is what the attorney has said about it.
We are approaching the end of our time here this hour. I'd like to finish off with a couple of different things. First of all, if you would kind of all go around and give your top tips or your best tips for people in this next week, or just what you most want them to know between now and next Tuesday. And I'll start with Chris.
I would say that go out and vote. Like, I mean, it's great to vote on election day, and if that's your day to vote, go do it then. But there's no reason not to vote right now. There have never been more options to vote. Never that I can think of more consequential things on the ballot. So yeah, there's no reason to put it off unless you just really get a lot out of voting on election day.
Deborah?
I would say the same, and then I'd add to that, to what others have said during this last hour, is to really go online and research the candidates. There's no reason not to know who you're voting for. There's so much information out there, and you can find it online on their own websites. You can find it on social media. You can even find voter guides from various media outlets that detail all of the candidates in the race. In fact, KMUW, of course, I should mention, we have the election blueprint that has all of that candidate information as well. So, and we've all done preview stories of some of the major races coming up. So you can find that content and those stories on our website here at KMUW.
Listen to a bunch of them while you're on the treadmill, getting ready for your day, and then you know what you're going to do. Yeah, good plug there, Deborah. Thank you. Kenya?
I'll just end by saying something that's pretty cliche, but elections have consequences. And we have never has it been as obvious as it has been, as Deborah said, during this pandemic, about the consequences of and the choices of our elections. So I want to jump back in with Chris and with Deborah, and I want to say vote early and take someone with you.
Jim?
Okay, of course, do your research, but do not rely on one source of information. Compare and contrast. In fact, don't collect your mail at all, because those mailers you get are not very helpful in sorting out truth from fiction. So do your research, vote, be respectful of others who may not hold your opinion, and as I indicated, don't collect your mail. And if you want to watch television at night, do streaming, and don't. You'll just be. It's incredible the number. I mean, if you want to understand that the Senate race in Kansas is competitive for the first time in decades, all you have to do is watch television. I mean, just the number of ads, the Bollier and Marshall ads, are convincing.
Okay, now I do want to do one bonus question, just for anyone who thinks he or she might be able to wade into this, but as a way to prepare for November, would any of you be willing to speak to, in your opinion, how we can come together after such a divisive election season? I would love to hear thoughts on that.
Well, I think it all comes down to having real conversations. We've so gotten used to talking at each other and past each other. I think the stuff that Chris does in the journal is very helpful in that regard. But you know, and challenging your own assumptions and your own beliefs, and being open to the fact that you don't know everything there is to know about what's going on and about the candidates. I mean, I think it starts individually. We challenge yourself, be open to other people, and be willing to have a real conversation with somebody who you disagree with, and see if you can't come to some sort of a meeting of the minds. It has to be this grassroots thing that bubbles up, because if we wait on somebody who's manipulating the system to solve the problem for us, we're going to be waiting for a long time.
Any last thoughts on bridge building?
Yeah, I think we're at, actually, with every great challenge comes great opportunity. And I think that we are right now during this challenge, we have the opportunity to be our better selves. And I think that the American people, and I know the people of Kansas, we're going to rise to that charge. We are going to be our better selves. I trust that.
Hope you're
That's
right.
a good place to conclude this evening. I will go back to what Deborah was talking about. My colleagues in the newsroom have been gathering information for you. So on election night, you can listen to us live or visit kmuw.org to follow along on Tuesday. And that final question that I asked was also to segue into a plug for our next Democracy on Tap event. And it's going to be a very special collaboration between KMUW and StoryCorps and the Kansas Leadership Center on November 17th, as we look forward at ways to bridge divides in our country, both political and otherwise, after this very divisive time. So watch for more information on that and join us on election night. And thank you so much to our panel for coming here and chatting with us today. This has been a really interesting conversation. And I hope you've enjoyed our program. It was sponsored by Susan and Leon Mader of Mader and Associates. Check out engageict.org for videos, podcasts, and other content. We actually just posted a fascinating interview with historian Dr. Robin Henry, looking back at 100 years of women's suffrage. So take a listen to that. I'm Sarah Jane Crespo. Thanks for joining Digital Democracy on Tap.